All right, so I hope you can see me within the frame. I can't really tell. I don't have my little picture-in-picture set up for myself. So hopefully you can see me within this video. So we're into industrial farming methods now. When we look at industrial farming methods, these are going to be those large-scale mega farms that we're talking about, whether it's for vegetable production or grain production, or in this case, a CAFO that we have in the picture. In this CAFO, this is an example of a chicken house. These little white buildings here house chickens, and we could have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 chickens, depending on the size of the chicken house. And we can see in this picture, we have 3 of the big chicken houses. This one here is probably there to store grain and equipment and things like that. What happens with these chicken houses, or with any CAFO for that matter, is there's a huge amount of waste production. And these black areas are what they call manure lagoons. And what these manure lagoons are is basically like a huge swimming pool. It would be the world's worst swimming pool that you never want to go in. What they do is they take the waste products, the poop and the urine from the animals, and they put them into those lagoons. They put it in and it's solid at first. But as more and more pressure builds up on it and it rains on it and things like that, it will liquefy. So this ends up being liquefied manure. Now, the good thing for it is they can pump that liquefied manure out, spray it on agricultural fields, and use it as a nutrient. But before they do that, as it's liquefying, it's starting to break down and decompose as well. There's organic material within that manure. As it breaks down, it's breaking down anaerobically. There's only oxygen at the very surface of this. There's no oxygen down here. So down here, it's going to be anaerobic. And as things decompose anaerobically, as organic material decomposes anaerobically, we don't produce carbon dioxide anymore. If there's oxygen available, we're going to produce carbon dioxide. If there's no oxygen available and it's an anaerobic process, now we're producing methane. That methane is a bigger problem for us than carbon dioxide. Both are greenhouse gases, but methane has 25 times the heat holding capacity of carbon dioxide. So for every molecule of methane we're putting up to the sky, it's basically like releasing 25 molecules of CO2. So these huge, massive manure lagoons, if we're not careful and we're allowing them to sit there too long, anaerobic decomposition is constantly occurring, and we have large quantities of methane being released. That's why agricultural livestock production is the largest greenhouse gas emitter. Not only do we have the cows belching methane up, farting methane out, but we also have these manure lagoons that are constantly producing it. So don't think that just because it's chicken or pork that you're not having problems with the methane. Any of these concentrated animal feed operations that produce these manure lagoons are going to have methane problems associated. So when we look at this, again, the manure is not just going to go to waste, it's going to be used as nutrients for their agricultural fields, but it has to liquefy first to make it easier to spread. That way they can just spray it over their fields. The liquid then drains into the ground and adds nutrients to the soil. The other problem with this is if they get too much rain, now the manure starts to overflow and go out of that pond. If it starts to overflow, it's going to run down the slope of the land, and say that there's a stream running over here, now it's going to go into that stream. As we have more and more of that agricultural runoff happening into the streams, whether it's after they spread it on the field and it washed off, or whether it washed right out of these manure lagoons, both of them are going to have that same result. It's going to increase nutrient levels in the water. By increasing nutrient levels in the water, we cause problems with eutrophication happening. All the water that we have in our agricultural sector, again, the Midwest is our primary agricultural sector. All the water that happens, all the runoff rather, that's nutrient rich that happens from farming in that agricultural sector in our Midwest inevitably finds its way into the Gulf of Mexico. That's why the Gulf of Mexico is hypoxic and we have reduced oxygen levels and the fish end up dying each year from it. Then during the months where we're not farming, the water has a chance to kind of use up those excess nutrients. It starts to, the hypoxia starts to go away and fish start to come back in. But every year it's a continuous cycle of eutrophication and hypoxia that happens in the Gulf of Mexico. And any place we have agriculture happening, we see the ocean creating these dead zones where that runoff is going into the ocean. And again, it's runoff from the agricultural fields and also from these manure lagoons. So we want to find a way to find more environmentally sound ways to do this industrial agriculture. We've shifted away from conventional agriculture being old MacDonald on his farm, and we've gotten into industrial agriculture being that conventional method. What used to be local family farms have gone away, and now we have these big mega farms. So when we look at it, we're causing problems with it. One of the big problems we're causing is desertification. And when we look at desertification, it's taking and reducing the productive potential of the land down. Anytime we reduce the productive potential is how much I can produce on a given amount of land. If I reduce that productive potential down to the point where it's not able to be arable anymore, meaning growable or farmable, then I start getting into the creation of deserts. Deserts are non-arable land. The more damage I do to the environment, the more damage I do to this farmland through topsoil erosion, through nutrient depletion, that's going to cause this desertification process to increase. And this is the reason why we have more and more desert covered land every year. So we need to find ways to fix this problem. And again, we can do that through adding nutrients to the soil, alternative farming practices that are going to keep topsoil from eroding, all those things. But we need to be aware that that's a problem. And yet, some of these slides you can read, so I'm not going to go over all of them. One of the big pushes towards reducing that desertification is doing more of a free range approach. As opposed to using that CAFO operation, now we're going to use free ranging. Free ranging is where you have these open fields and open pastures that the animals are able to freely roam, consume those grasses, consume the insects if they're chickens, and they're able to grow in more of a natural type of way. The problem with this is, even though it's more sustainable from an environmental standpoint, it takes a lot longer for the animal to reach that harvestable size because they're not consuming calories at as high of a rate. So they're not putting on as much mass as quickly. In addition to that, as they're wandering around in the fields, they're pooping in random spots as opposed to concentrating it in those poop lagoons. So we don't have the problem with the disposal of those large quantities of manure. It's more naturally fertilizing the fields as they're walking around. They're less likely to spread disease. For the sole purpose, they're not as concentrated in. We don't have to use as many antibiotics and medications because we don't have as many diseases either. The problem with it is it uses considerably more land and costs significantly more. It's cheaper and more efficient to use CAFO operations. That's how we're getting the $3 a pound ground beef. If we start shifting to only free range, now ground beef might cost $8 a pound. So if we want that cheap meat that we can provide protein for the world relatively cheaply, we're going to have to use these CAFOs. If we want more of an environmentally sustainable form of meat, we're going to use free range. But if we choose to use free range, we're going to have to drastically reduce our meat consumption. We're going to have to find alternative methods to find our protein sources. So we're going to turn more to a vegetarian heavy diet as opposed to a meat heavy diet. Now, these free ranging, they range on grazelands, which are just open grassland. The problem with that is we have a lot of problem with tragedy of the commons. So we end up with vegetation loss. When we have vegetation loss, there's no roots to hold the land or the soil in place anymore, and we have high rates of erosion. If that erosion gets too bad, then we can have desertification occur. And that's what we're seeing in our Midwest states a lot. Throughout Montana, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, these are our heavy rangeland states. And a lot of these rangelands are actually run by the government. The government sells leases to the ranchers to graze their cattle and animals on this property. Any farmer can apply for a permit, and the permits are fairly cheap. That's one of the problems with it. They're not charging the true cost of land use. So they're over-consuming the land, they're using too many nutrients, they're eating too many of the grasses, and the rangelands are becoming severely depleted. So where we used to have a thriving grassland ecosystem, now we're starting to have the deserts that are in Southern California start to kind of encroach this way. The deserts through Nevada are starting to expand their borders. And we're ending up with these huge amounts of land that used to be a thriving grassland that are now becoming desert because we've reduced the nutrients and eroded so much topsoil away due to overgrazing. And that's one of those examples of the tragedy of the commons. People just keep adding more and more cows. And in some cases, they'll have a permit for 100 cows, for instance, but they'll put 1,000 cows on the land because the government just doesn't pick up on it very much. And if you think about it, this is a huge amount of vast open space. The more animals for farming they put on, the less habitats available for the natural species. So we see a great reduction in biodiversity in here as well. Not only biodiversity of plant species, but the biodiversity of the native mammals and insects we had out there. So we need to go to a resource conservation ethics. We want to maximize the use of our resource, but make sure we're doing it in a smart way. We want to conserve as much as we have so that it's always available for future generations. This is what's going to help us to eliminate that tragedy of the commons. And again, I think that we can kind of go through these. Uh, with the mining, I think you guys can read these and understand these. We really hammered mining with you guys in class. You can watch the Mr. Anderson videos. He does a really good job explaining it. So I'm going to skip through this and maybe touch on a few things within it, but not too much. These are the different methods of surface mining. Again, main difference is surface mining is within 100 meters of the surface. So anything from 0 to 100 meters down, they're going to surface mine for. It's more efficient and cost effective to do that. And again, they're going to do it through strip mining, open pit mining, mountaintop removal, or placer mining. And again, you can watch, there's tons of videos out there. Google a video if you don't understand it. The leftover material that they're removing during the mining, whether it's this overburden that they're removing from the surface or the actual rock that's left over from processing the ore, those are the mining spoils. And one of the big problems we have are the tailings. The tailings are what's left over from the ore. The land, like if this is our ore deposit here, the land that we're removing above the ore, this is called overburden. The overburden is dumped back into the pits or into the strips after they're done surface mining. So the overburden isn't as bad from an environmental standpoint. There's a law in the books now that they have to take the topsoil, pile it up separate, and dump the overburden back in first, spread the topsoil back, and reclaim the mine site exactly as it was before they mined. The tailings, though, are where the problem comes in. As we take that ore, we're moving it to a new location process. The rock that's left over from extracting the mineral are those tailings, and those are just leftovers. We can't bring those back and put them back in the holes. Since it's processed elsewhere, it doesn't make it cost effective to do that. So the tailings are what we tend to worry about. And again, that's what these are. These would be huge tailing piles left over from the mining. Again, if it's over 100 meters, then they do subsurface mining. This is mainly coal, precious metals, diamonds, etc. This is something we are going to talk about because AMD or acid mine drainage is extremely important. Either the tailings piles or the abandoned mine shafts have the ability to create this. And what we have is iron sulfide. This is pyrite. And pyrite is a compound that's a mixture of iron and sulfur. The problem with pyrite is when it's exposed to oxygen and water, bacteria start to break it down and release those sulfurs. As the bacteria break the iron sulfide down and split it into its ions, then it starts to oxidize and react with the water. As that happens, it's producing iron ions and sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid is what we worry about. Because anytime we make acidic conditions, we're able to dissolve metals readily. So if that rock, the tailing pile, has mercury in it or arsenic in it or any other metal that might be problematic to us, or that sulfuric acid running over it is going to dissolve those metals into the water. This is aqueous in nature. Aqueous means that it's dissolved in water. So most of the time when we have this happening, it's a heap pile or a tailings pile. The rain falls on that, the water trickles down through and percolates down through, causing this reaction to happen. The outflow of that is that super low pH water because it's loaded with sulfuric acid. As that's going down through that pile too, it's dissolving metals into it. In addition, that low pH runoff finds its way into streams and rivers. As it moves through that river, any rocks that are contained within that start to decrease or start to get exposed to that acidic water, and the metals start to leach out of those. That's going to cause us problems if we're drinking from that water, or it's going to cause organisms problems if they're living within the water or drinking from that water as well. So we end up with metals that leach into it, corrosive compounds that are formed, all those different things. In addition to that, this acid mine drainage tends to be orangish in color if it was pyrite that caused it. If it's aluminum sulfide, then it tends to be white in color. But it doesn't matter what the compound is, this ion here, whether it's iron or aluminum, will oxidize. So in this case, it's going to form iron oxide. Iron oxide is basically rust, so you get an orange coating over all the surfaces. That orange coating can then disrupt fish populations, invertebrate populations, plants, all those things. So we end up with toxic metals and other pollutants from that rock finding their way into the bodies of water. So we need a way to fix this. One of the easiest ways to fix it is to remediate the impact of it. So what we need to do is address first the acidity problem. So we'll take the water, again, low pH, high iron content. We want to address the pH problem first. So we'll allow it to flow through a limestone bed. And that limestone serves as a buffer, so it's going to help to neutralize the acidity of that water. So as it flows over the limestone, not only is it neutralizing and raising the pH up, but it's allowing that those iron ions in there to be exposed to oxygen, and they start to oxidize then, and you end up with an orange coating to the limestone rock. Okay, that would happen in the streams and rivers before. As it went further downstream, more oxidation would happen. We'd have more orange coloration to the water. So as it goes over that limestone rock, now we end up with a neutral pH. And we've reduced and oxidized that iron to that orangish color. So we end up with an orange color to our water. Now, what we do is we take that outflow of that orangish water and we dump it into a wetland system. When we dump it into the wetland system, the water moves very slowly through the wetlands, and the wetlands are loaded up with algae and other plants. So as it's moving slowly, gravity pulls those heavier metal oxides down to the bottom and it traps it within the sediment. In addition to that, the plants are absorbing some of those metal ions, trapping it within their organic tissues. So the wetlands act like a filter for the water. We reduced, again, the acidity of it. We raised the pH up because, again, acids equal low pH. We raised the pH up by passing it over the limestone buffer first. That exposure to the oxygen allowed the irons to oxidize out. We passed that heavy iron oxide water into the wetland, filtered it out, and coming out the other end of the wetland, then we have cleaner, low or neutral pH water that doesn't have those heavy metal concentrations in it. So this is a way to clean up the river system. So what we would have is like a stream that's polluted running through. We would divert the water from the stream into that wetland system, allow the effluent or the drainage from that wetland to go back into the stream downstream, releasing it as cleaner water. Let's go back to the note slides. And again, that's what we just talked about. This picture gives you the pros and cons of mining. You guys should study that. And that's going to lead us into residential land use. I'm just going to keep on rolling with this video. I know we're over that 15-minute time frame, but we're going to keep on rolling with it and go because I don't want to keep on having to slow down and make a bunch of videos. Uploading to YouTube takes forever. So I don't think you need to know suburbs and exurbs for the AP exam. Just know that the suburbs are creating a problem called urban sprawl. When we look at our residential land use, this is land that people are using for living on, not farms, not industry, it's just housing. So when we look, we have more of our population shifting to those urban areas. They want to live within the cities. Our rural population, people don't really want to live in the rural areas. We have more people that want to live in the urban zones because it's easier. You have doctors available to you readily, grocery stores close by, lots of recreation type activities to do. So people want more of that urban setting. The problem with this is they don't want to live necessarily within the heart of the city because there's crime, there's violence, there's pollution, all those problems. So what they want to do is they want to have those benefits of the urban areas, but not have the drawbacks of living within the city. So that's where the suburbs came about. As people from the rural areas and as people from the cities gained enough money, they started to want to have all those creature comforts without the impacts of the city life. So they started to create these suburbs, and that would be like where we live at in Murraysville, and we have Penn Hills nearby and Monroeville, all those places that are directly linked to that city that's close by. And what that created was something called urban sprawl. That's where we have this heart of the city, the metropolitan area here. That's where life existed at. But it was hard for people to get out of those areas. We had rural and we had urban. Those were the only two options. Think back to America in the 1910s. That's what we had. We either had city life or rural life. There was no in between. As time goes on, though, now where it used to be difficult for them to get out of the city and go into the rural areas, now we had the invention of cars. We had mass transit become available. Things started to get cheaper, more people could afford those. So now we had road systems being built out into those rural areas. Now people could take their car, go for a drive, and start commuting back and forth to work. So now they bought land and built houses out here, and we started having housing development, and towns springing up. Those smaller towns that aren't those big urban centers, those are what we call suburbs. And more of those suburbs started to spring up as more people started to gain the wealth needed to have the transportation into and out of the city. So as they started to transport into and out of the city, the urban areas started to expand and more of the rural people got pushed out. Farmland started to go away, green spaces started to be declined. We started cutting down forest to build our housing developments. So it was all due to basically automobiles and highway construction. Yeah, in addition, it got to be more expensive to live in the urban areas. Rent was super cheap because spaces at a premium. You couldn't afford to create a business because it was super expensive to be able to start that business up. You had to pay a high rent in order to be able to live in those areas. You didn't want to be a farmer, but you couldn't afford to live in the urban areas, so you started to move into these suburbs. So the cost of living basically cost people out. You get more for less in the suburbs. My wife and I just bought a house and we spent more than I wanted to spend. But the amount of money it would have taken for the house that we have and the property that we have, if it was in more of an urban setting, it would have been, $1 million or $2 million. Let's say that we take the house that we have and transplant it into Los Angeles, for instance. It would be like a $5 million house in Los Angeles. There's no way it's anywhere near $5 million where we live at. We live out in Apollo, more of a exurb type of area, not even a suburb, but an exurb, because the suburbs are closer to the city, exurbs are on the outskirts. The money we spent for our house gets us a lot more here than it does in Los Angeles. For the amount we paid in Los Angeles, we wouldn't be able to survive. We'd have like a one-room little shack. That's it. As more people are moving out of these cities, though, now we start getting urban blight because the people that are moving into the suburbs are the workforce. They're going to be paying taxes. They're the more wealthy people. They're going to be taking their tax dollars with them to these new communities. Now the tax revenue of the urban areas goes down. They can't provide the social programs anymore. They can't keep their roads up. They can't offer mass transit at a affordable price for the poor people. So then we have urban blight happening. Businesses start to close. Buildings become dilapidated, and we start having it really, really just be a terrible, terrible place to live. So that makes even more people want to leave the cities, and we have even more of a immigration problem. So people are immigrating to the suburbs more and more. That causes even more urban blight, which is again one of those positive feedback loops that kick in. So you need to know urban sprawl. You don't really have to know exurb and suburb definitions. You should know urban sprawl and what the sources are for it. And again, that's what these pictures are showing. Shows you that positive feedback loop that kicks in. Again, talks a little bit about it. You don't have to know the Highway Trust Fund, but these are all things that go into that urban sprawl. So we're going to skip over that. The smart growth, just know that we want to create places that people want to move back into the cities. So the main thing that it doesn't mention in this slide is we always want to build up, not out. Because we don't want urban sprawl to kick in. We don't want to keep on expanding the borders of that city bigger and bigger and bigger. We want to keep the borders where they're at. So we're going to build upwards instead of outwards. By adding extra stories on the buildings, instead of building a new building all over the place, or all over again rather, now we have less of a footprint that's an impermeable surface. So now when it rains, we still kept that same building footprint. We just built several new floors onto it. If I'd have built 3 new buildings, now I have even more land that's impermeable, not allowing water to soak in. I have more runoff. More runoff equals more flooding equals more erosion, and we get all those problems associated with it. Not to mention the pollution that runs off the land in these cities also. So build up, not out, make it walkable so we don't have to have cars. Less cars we have, less pollution we have. We want to have a lot of different opportunities. Not everybody wants to live in a skyscraper, so we have to have some more low density housing, all those different things. And we always want to have mixed land usage. We want places to be not only industry buildings, but also have green roofs or green spaces. That way they can provide habitat for organisms. I was in Asheville, North Carolina this summer, and it was amazing what they were doing down there. Lots of different beer companies are putting breweries in the area. But what they're requiring their breweries to do is to be as low environmental impact as they can. New Belgium Brewing is down there. And what they did was they have a 96% recovery rate for all the water that they use in their factory. So as they're making the beer, they're recovering 96% of the waste that they're producing, not only the water, but the spent grains that they're using and the heat that they're using to boil the water. They're using that heat then and the steam from that for other purposes too. So they're getting a much more environmentally friendly way to do this. And they did that because the stakeholders took issue with them building all these new industry buildings there. They didn't want the pollution associated with them. They said, it's fine if you move in, but you're going to have to move in under our terms. And again, that's the way that they're doing smart growth. And again, that sense of place belonging to the area. The citizens of Asheville belong to Asheville. They wanted that place kept to be conserved as much as we can. Again, read these. You guys can know these. You don't have to bog yourself down knowing all of them specifically, but just know the basics of smart growth. All right, our next video, I'm going to stop there. This one's starting to get a little too long. We'll talk about not only sustainable agriculture, but we'll kind of wrap everything up for the unit.